Hey everybody, and welcome back for part 6 of our Sweatpants BI customer satisfaction infographic walkthrough with the fake airlines dataset that we've been using that I call Sweatpants Air. And in part 6, we're going to take our brand new layout design and we're going to take the data visuals that we laid out in videos 2, 3, and 4, and we're just going to start to integrate everything together. So this is going to mean, taking the new color palette that we established in our layout and incorporating that color palette into our data visuals and just sort of bringing everything into one place and tying it all together aesthetically so that everything looks like it belongs as part of the same infographic, but we're also going to be making sure that we're using very smart use of color so that we're always presenting first and foremost what the user really needs to take away from all of these different data visuals. So we're going to be talking about, utilizing color and design elements within an infographic to make sure that the most important insights really jump forward, and just how to lay out things so that the infographic really flows from top to bottom. So we're going to start over here with our passenger demographics section of our infographic. And of course, we've already got plenty of images or data visuals that we already built earlier in the course. Don't be thrown off by the different colors here. When we updated the color theme in Power BI, of course, it automatically updated the colors on all of these data visuals. So these are exactly what we built a few minutes ago. They just look a little bit different. And we're going to start with these donut charts. And I'm going to go ahead and drop these into place. I don't need them to be quite this large, so since I've already got all 4 selected, let's go ahead and head to our general settings. And I'm going to see if I can get away with making these about 200 pixels tall. And let's see what they look like at 340. Might even see if I can get down to 320. That looks pretty good. I'm just going to kind of drag these into position. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab my donut chart from, or my bar chart from over here rather. I'm going to go ahead and put that into position. Now here, I am going to make this fairly tight, but I don't want it to be so small that it's very, very hard to read. So I'm going to give myself just a little bit more space here. I'm going to decrease the height of my donut charts a little bit more. Let's see if I can get that down to 180. This lets me increase the height of my bar chart a little bit more. And then I'm just going to kind of manually use the arrow keys on my keyboard to move those donut charts up. And looks like I actually need to move my bar chart up just a little bit more, which is all no big deal. We're just going to manually kind of nudge all of our donut charts into position. That's great. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to just control, and I'll do it one more time. I'm just going to control select my donut charts. I'm going to go over to my formatting options, and I'm going to click on General and Effects. And for our background, let's go ahead and grab the darkest blue over here in our color palette. And I'm going to select that. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to have an invisible sort of border, around each of these squares just using the background color so that anyone who's looking at this can clearly tell these donut charts apart. So let's go back to our formatting options. Now we're going to focus on an outline border. And turning on this visual border is really just a personal preference. Anyone who's watched enough of my videos knows that I love to do rounded corners on my visuals, and I usually just use 10 pixels just to give a very, very soft rounding that to me is just a little bit less boring than doing, big square charts all the time. Now that we're done with that, we've got our backgrounds selected. Let's go ahead and change our titles. We're going to need white titles, so that they, are easy to read against these dark backgrounds. And I'm just going to use an italicized font. And next, let's go ahead and turn off our legends, because we're actually not going to use legends on these donut charts since none of them have too many values. We're just going to add category and percent of total directly to the visuals. Let's go ahead and make our data labels DIN. We are only going to show the numbers themselves, no decimal points. And let's go ahead and make our data labels white as well. And I'm just kind of scanning to make sure that everybody can clearly read each data label. Looks like they can, and in fact, we can even get away with making them a little bit larger. Notice now my Economy Plus is cut off a little bit. So if that happens, we can also go to our rotation options and play around a little bit with rotating our donut charts until we see all of the values are easily readable. And so Economy Plus is now showing everything here. So now let's go ahead and click on the first donut chart. And what we're trying to do with our color combinations is we're really trying to emphasize the largest proportion here of each of these donut charts. So in this case, it would be returning. For our next chart, it's going to be business. After that, female. And after that, business. And so we're going to use our accent color here for the largest portion of the wedge. And for the other portion, obviously our users can still see this, they can still read it, but we're going to make it a little bit more subtle here. And first I'm going to try and see what it looks like with blue. You can also experiment with what it would look like if you used a much darker version of the kind of blue accent color that we've already got. So I kind of like, something around in this area. The point is just to kind of pick something that anybody can still clearly see. That looks pretty good to me. And now we're going to go to the next, and we're going to click on slices and business. We're going to use kind of our dark background color. For this one, since there are 3 values, you're obviously going to have to mix up your colors a little bit more. That looks pretty good to me. After that, the next 2 become a little bit easier. And now we're just going to quickly update our titles for each of these donut charts. Responses by customer type. I'm even going to make my titles a little bit bigger. Let's try 13. Next. The reason that I'm doing the 3 dots is I've already said that this is responses by customer type. I don't want to say responses by class, responses by travel, responses by gender. All of that's really redundant. So instead, I'm just letting my audience know that all of these are visualizing the same metric. We're just using something slightly different here. So I did notice that my colors now on this donut chart are thrown off. Maybe I forgot to update it, but no big deal. Let's go ahead and... There we go. Probably got distracted while I was talking. And for the last donut chart, of course, we're just going to do by gender for the title. And now for my bar chart down here, I'm just going to go ahead and grab one of my donut charts. I'm going to head home and I'm going to format Painter so that I can copy most of my formatting options over to this bar chart. Obviously not everything, so I do still have some work to do, but at least most of the effects and the background colors are already done for me. So let's go ahead and update first our title here. Needs to be white, which it already is, and this is going to be percent of responses by age group. Next, I'm going to go to General again and go to Properties, and let's go to our advanced options and let's turn off the responsive setting, which of course is why we're seeing these warning signs flashing for all of our formatting options. So we're going to turn off advanced options, turn off responsive. And now we're just going to try to highlight this and get rid of everything that is redundant or obvious that we don't need. First and foremost, since the title of this chart is already percent of responses by age group, we don't need to label our x-axis with something obvious like age group, because we've already told the user what it is. So let's go ahead and increase our font for our x-axis. Let's choose DIN, and I'm going to make this white. I'm even going to increase it to 12 just to make it even easier to read. And for our y-axis, I only have 7 groups here. So let's just get rid of our y-axis entirely, starting with the title. And now I'm just going to add labels here to my data values. I'm going to show 0 decimal places. And for my colors, you can go dark if you want to. You can go light, and use a shade of blue. There are a lot of different ways to make this bar chart look totally fine. Another thing that you can do is, if you want, you can also use the response count measure that is feeding this bar chart and go with something like this that will highlight the areas that have the highest concentration of responses. I did accidentally use my same background color blue, so let's go ahead and grab a darker blue here. That looks much better immediately. And now I'm just going to decrease the size of my bars here. Let's go with something much smaller profile. So I'm going to make kind of skinny bars in this bar chart. I want to go back and investigate my colors one more time. I notice that this orange is very bright. It's not actually my ColourPop color. So let's go ahead and grab that kind of more muted orange. And now this is looking pretty good. So the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to carry over these my 2 response measures here that are comparing 2022 and 2021. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy these over here. But I'm not actually going to be using these cards. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new measure here for 2022 responses. And I'm going to format, but first I'm going to calculate response count just for 2022. And I'm going to format this in the following format. And then I'm going to copy this measure, and I'm going to do the same thing for my 2021 responses. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a button, and I'm just going to do a blank button to start with. And for this button, I'm going to choose oval as my shape, and I'm going to add a title right away to this. And the title is going to be 2022 responses. And I'm going to center that. And then I'm just going to continue to kind of mess with my sizing until the circle is more or less a perfect circle. If you want, you can go ahead and continue to update your title like so. We really just want to make sure that it's easily readable. So white might actually be our best bet here. I'm going to make sure that I'm totally utilizing all of the space available to me. Then we're going to drop down our formatting options for the oval, and we're going to turn on text. We're going to use conditional formatting for our text, and for the text on this first button, we're going to use our 2022 responses measure. And now you can see the 65,326 in the circle. So let's go ahead and use DIN as our font. Let's see what 30 looks like. Pretty good. I think I can even go larger with my text. And I'm going to use a white color. And for my icon and border, you can turn on the border or turn it off. Either way, we're going to format it here in just a second. For our fill, let's go ahead and use our orange accent color. And of course, you can see there's some transparency. So let's drop our transparency to 0. And for our border, I think I am going to keep it. So let's go ahead and make dark brown or dark orange, or this kind of burnt orange as our border color. I'm going to increase the size just a little bit here. I'm even going to experiment with turning on a drop shadow. Let's go ahead and use bottom. And again, I'm just going to keep kind of resizing this until it looks good to me. on the whole, I think that'll work. I'm going to go ahead and head back to my title. I forgot to italicize it. But once that's done, then we're just going to copy and paste that circle. And we're going to change the title to 2021 responses. And we're going to, of course, switch our text to point from 2022 responses to 2021 responses. And you can see I've now got that measure pulling in. And because we really want to draw attention to the most recent year's response rate, 2021 responses are less important and they're really just there to be illustrative. So let's go ahead and choose dark blue as our background color for this, and for our border, I'm going to go with a very, very dark blue again. And now our demographics section is pretty well complete, and we can go ahead and get rid of these two cards here. And so there's our demographics section. Our next section will be a little bit faster because we're not going to have to do so much formatting. Really, all we need to do is go to our Net Promoter Score tab over here, and we're going to grab our field parameter slicer, of course, and our two bar charts. And let's go ahead and just copy those over to our infographic. And I'm going to go ahead and scroll on down to the Net Promoter Score section. And I'm going to go ahead and position my slicer like so. And for my bar charts, I'm going to need about this much space. Ditto for this. And if you want to, if you're like me and you're really concerned about like spacing and everything, something else that you can do is, right now I'm choosing to actually show the entire parameter here, the parameter slicer. You don't necessarily have to do that. If you want the bar charts to have even heavier emphasis, we can also use our slicer settings here and instead just go with a simple drop down. That way we have enough room for someone to read all of the options, and we're really not sacrificing all that much in terms of height for our bar charts. So I might just do that instead. I'm going to go ahead and multi-select my charts and make sure that I have them both about the same height. There we go. And now, like I said, this isn't going to take nearly as long because we already have some formatting ready to go in the terms of these templates up here. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab this bar chart. I'm going to go home and I'm going to format my painter. And I'm going to carry over those formatting settings to these two bar charts. So, in fact, I'm even going to, I was going to say I was going to copy some of the formatting over to the slicer, but actually I'm just going to turn off the background entirely. And for my slicer here, what I want to do is I want to make sure that users see this slicer. This slicer is important for using these bar charts down here. So let's go ahead and just give our values an orange accent background. We're going to use DIN as our font. I'm going to make these nice and large. Hopefully not too large that, okay, nothing's getting cut off. So let's go ahead and use white as our font selection. And for our header, instead of using something like NPS parameter, which is the name of our field here, but this is probably not going to mean anything to someone who is looking at this infographic, let's use our header as an opportunity to give someone some explanation as to what's going on here. So we're going to tell people, pick a field from the data for which you would like to compare Net Promoter Score. And I'm going to go ahead and make this white. I'm going to italicize it. And looks like I can just barely get away with making the header size 13. So now let's go ahead and make our two bar charts here just a little bit larger. So I'm going to go select both of them, go to Properties. Let's increase the height to 220 here. There we go. And the last thing that I want to do is I want to go ahead and check out my formatting for these two items. And I am actually going to want to make sure that I'm using the right shade of coloring for the conditional formatting on these bars. So let me go ahead and pick the first one here. And you'll see that the default conditional formatting is currently set to response count. That's not what I want to use. I want to use Net Promoter Score, of course. That changes things just a little bit. But I'm still using the wrong measure. I should be doing year-over-year Net Promoter Score. There we go. I was wondering why the ones on the left weren't the ones that were lit up. And now, for this chart, which is comparing year by year, let's go ahead and add our legend back in. And I'm going to use my top left stacked legend so that users can see 2021 and 2022. And let's go ahead and make our bars orange and dark blue. And of course for my legend, you can see the years are super hard to read over here. So of course let's use white for our legend text and DIN font. Let's make that just a little bit larger here. One thing I'm noticing too is that my age group, the x-axis, the sorting is screwed up again. So let's go ahead and use age group and sort ascending. And that looks much better. And now for my section over here, obviously I've got plenty of room. I'm going to make these just a little bit smaller because I am going to be adding an additional circle over here. So let's try 225 by 200. That looks pretty circular to me. Okay. So the first sort of call out KPI bubble here. I'm just multi-selecting here and trying to make sure that I have enough space for everything. At the moment, I think I'm going to have to make them a little bit smaller, which I do. For this first KPI, I'm going to need to know what the 2022 NPS is, followed by 2021 NPS, then followed by year-over-year change. And I'm just going to kind of move these down just a little bit so that they're all stacked on top of each other. So let's go ahead and create a new measure here for 2022 Net Promoter Score. And this is going to be calculate first Net Promoter Score for where the year equals 2022. I want to make sure that this number is always formatted correctly. So I'm going to format it like so. And then for everything else, I'm just going to change this to 2021. And I want it formatted the same way. And then for the last measure down here, I'm going to create a new one that is going to be year-over-year NPS change. And I'm going to add some conditional logic here. And that is switch when the following is true. If the year-over-year change in NPS is greater than 0, then I want to add a plus sign and a space in front of my year-over-year change in NPS. Of course, I want the year-over-year change in NPS formatted in the correct way. And finally, just want to go ahead and copy my year-over-year change. And I should end up here with my 2022 NPS. So we'll go ahead and add that measure for our text. 2022 NPS, 47 is correct. Let's go ahead and update our 2021 NPS. It is 1, that is correct. And for my year-over-year change, I'm going to drop down my measures and grab my my year-over-year NPS change. And there you can see the plus 46. And of course, this is something that we very, very much want to call out as much as possible. So we don't want to use this dark blue that kind of disappears into our background. I'm actually going to use white here as my background. And I'm going to call this out with a fairly vibrant and big orange. Might have been too big. Let's just go with that. And I'm going to change my border color to my accent orange so that somebody can really see this plus 46 down here. Now it's time to start doing our experience section. So for our experience section, first I'm just going to go ahead and grab my two big bar charts over here, and I'm going to incorporate those first. So let's go ahead and scroll down, and let's take our bar charts with us all the way to the bottom here. And I want to make sure that these have plenty of room for maximum readability here. And in fact, I'm not going to use any more of my circular KPI gauges. Let's just go ahead and make sure that these are nice and readable. And let's go ahead and steal some formatting from our one of our bar charts up here. And I'll copy this over to this chart. And now, of course, these are still pretty ugly, so we're going to have to give them another pass super fast. I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit larger here. Okay, and for this first bar chart, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the title. And what this is showing is year-over-year satisfaction score change by category. And this one is the distribution of scores for 2022 passengers. So we do want to make sure that we have a filter on this chart so that it's clear that this is just 2022 passengers that we're including over here. And for this chart, we don't really need a legend. So let's go ahead and just turn off our legend. That gives us a lot more room to be able to read this chart. The first thing that I'm really noticing now is, of course, that almost all of my y-axis values over here are being cut off because these bars are too long. So you'll see I have like 3 dots at the end of almost everything. Now for some of my larger values here, like departure and arrival time convenience, there's not a whole lot that I can do. But for everything else, I can open up my y-axis settings and drag my max area width all the way out so that now departure and arrival time convenience is the only one that I can't fully read. So let's go ahead and I'm going to try to make these just a little bit larger so that I can read all of my values here. That's looking good. Now I'm just going to kind of bump it over a little bit and try to make this chart just a little bit larger because I'm going to have exactly the same problems. Now let's go ahead and see if we can move our legend. I'm hoping we have enough room, to show everything across the top. Now notice that I've said distribution of satisfaction scores for 2022 passengers. I do have a typo in there. I don't think we really need the distribution of satisfaction of scores. Let's go ahead and get rid of the extra of there. And since I've already said distribution of scores, I really don't need this title here on my legend. It saves me just a little bit of additional space, right? So let's go back to our y-axis. I'm going to try to make these values as large as I can. And now this is a lot going on here in a fairly small space. So what do we really want to highlight? Well, logically, we really want to highlight where the biggest problems are. In other words, where are we experiencing members who are not having great experiences, or where are we experiencing the biggest trouble spots? It doesn't really make sense to highlight the nines and tens because those are already very, very happy customers. So we might want to start over here with our bars. And let's go ahead and make sure that we're building in plenty of accent colors over here to really highlight the areas where we need to focus as a company, areas where we need to improve. And in fact, I'm even going to cheat a little bit and grab a really bright orange for my 4. That might even actually be a little bit too bright. So let's go for the 5. There we go. And now once we get into the 6s, we're starting to kind of come out of our real problem areas. So everything beyond 6, I'm starting to use increasingly darker shades of blue just to kind of push these colors to the background a little bit. And the end result is that we end up with something that looks like this, where 0 through 5 ends up really highlighted, enough that we can see in-flight Wi-Fi service maybe needs a little bit of work, ease of online booking maybe needs a little bit of work, but our attention is really drawn to these lower values here. We can also add additional color pops over here to our bar chart, which I forgot to do. So let's go ahead and open up our bars, and we're going to add some default coloring here, but not for response count, of course. Instead of response count, we're going to be using our year-over-year score change measure, which is being used in this bar chart. This is the measure that the 13, 14, 11% that they're referencing. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. And of course, now our attention is immediately drawn to ease of online booking and in-flight Wi-Fi service. So even though those two specifically are showing up as areas that passengers are still experiencing a lot of difficulty, and these tend to be our highest concentrations of people who rated these areas low, those are also areas of our biggest average gains. So this side-by-side comparison makes that a little bit easier to compare. Now let's go ahead and head back to Experience, and let's go ahead and grab our line chart here. And our line chart, of course, shows the year-over-year change between average satisfaction for 2021 and for 2022 by our different experience groups. So this is a tough visual. There's a lot going on here in a fairly small amount of space. So let's see what we can do. First, let's go ahead and head to our properties, to our advanced options, turn off responsive. Now let's go ahead and go to our x-axis. We're not going to need this year title by the time we're done. And we're not even going to need the title on our y-axis. So we'll turn that off. That's already giving us quite a bit of space back. We're also not going to need the title on our legend here by the time we're done. So we're already in better shape than when we started. Now let's go ahead and add our background color, which is our dark blue here. Let's go ahead and add our visual border just like what we have up here. Of course, I'm using 10 pixel rounded corners in this kind of dark blue. After we're done with that, let's go ahead and add our title, which is going to be year-over-year satisfaction change by experience group. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky because now we're just going to try to make these all even. And that looks good. I'm going to use the same white DIN text here. And now let's go to our legend and see what this looks like if we use top left stack. You can see it looks like we're going to get away with that just fine. So let's go ahead and change our color there to white. We're going to use DIN again. We're going to make it just a little bit larger. And for our y-axis, we're going to use white again and DIN. And for our x-axis, of course, we're going to use DIN. Going to make it a little bit larger. And we're going to use white again for our font so that people can see 2021 and 2022. And the whole point of this visual is to help people see that all of these satisfaction areas are increasing. So the colors that we choose for the lines are not as important. We can make the lines a little bit thicker. We can use any colors that we want, but of course, let's go ahead and try to stay with mostly colors that we've already been using elsewhere in the tool. Maybe we decide that we really want to call out the lowest and the highest one here, which is booking and post-flight. So let's go ahead and for post-flight use orange, and for booking use a light orange, and instead we'll use that dark blue for pre-flight. So everything's got a color here, and we're also just going to add markers here to help people really see kind of the before and after change. So, still able to pretty much tell the story that we wanted to tell here, and that is just that all of these experience groups are seeing increasing year-over-year satisfaction change. Now let's go ahead and grab our last chart, and we're going to drag this all the way down to the bottom. And again, we have a very, busy chart with a very small amount of space, but it should still be enough for us. And for this chart, what we're basically trying to show is the relationship between average satisfaction score versus average departure delay. And to tell this, we don't, because we're using a scatter plot, it is best practice to use labels on both of our axes here so that people know which is which, because we're going to have two numeric axes. But we definitely need to turn off our responsive setting on this chart. And we're also going to shorten both of these so that they're not fully spelled out like our measures over here, average of departure delay and average of passenger satisfaction. So let's go ahead and for our x-axis, change the title to average departure, or if you even want to, since we already said average departure delay, let's just say average delay there. And for our y-axis, we can just say average satisfaction. That way, neither of our labels gets cut off. Now let's go to our general settings. Of course, we're going to use our background color and the same visual border that we've been using up till now, which is going to be blue, that dark bluish teal with a 10 pixel outline. Let's head back to our title. Let's make it white. Let's head to our x-axis and make the title there white. And also our values need to be DIN. There we go. And our y-axis values, exactly the same. Finally, our title also needs to be white. And now we just need to worry about the individual dots themselves, which are not terribly important. What we're really interested in here is this trend line showing the negative relationship between customer or passenger satisfaction and the average departure delay. So we don't need to worry too much about the individual markers here. What we need to do is focus on that trend line. So let's just try using blue. I'll do a slightly brighter blue there. That'll work just fine. And for our trend line, we're going to make that orange. Let's try dotted. That's actually still a little bit too subtle for me. I forgot that I can't increase the thickness of the line. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to go white, and we're going to go darker with our markers so that that bright white line really shows up even more. In fact, now I'm curious to try the orange again. Sometimes you have to go back and forth to really figure out what looks right. But I think I like the orange better now. But of course, we didn't want to have that orange on that brighter blue because it wasn't enough contrast. So now we're still able to see the underlying markers and the bubbles, which are just there to be illustrative. But what we really need is this orange line that again is showing the negative relationship that we're trying to sell to our airline business, to Sweatpants Air, showing them that, hey, if we want happy customers, we have to get them, onto the plane and off the ground on time. So there we go. So now each of our 4 sections is, pretty well populated with visuals. We're able to tell the story that we want to tell. Now it's time to actually start writing some text out to really explain everything to our audience that is happening in these 3 sections and in the report. And then, of course, at the end of this, we're going to need a nice recommendation on, we have this gigantic increase in Net Promoter Score. Where do we go next as a company?